We're going to take a quick look at an introduction to systems of equations. This right here in the rectangle, that's a system of equations, which is a fancy term for saying now instead of having just one equation, you've got two equations. And instead of just solving for a value for x or y, instead of just solving for one value like x, you end up getting two answers, one for x and one for y. To put some perspective on it, what you've been working with is one equation where you had to answer for one variable. That is not a system of equations. This is. So what we're going to end up doing is finding different techniques for solving this equation. When you do solve it, you'll end up with a value for x and a value for y. And I'm going to show you an example of something that is a solution and something that is not a solution. If x equals 5, y equals 2 is a solution, that means it works in both of those equations. So let me show you by plugging in. I've taken the first equation in the system, plugged in the 5 and the 2, the 5 for the x, the 2 for the y, and I've worked it out, and I've ended up with a true statement, which means 5 and 2 works in that equation. But for this to be a solution for the whole system, it has to work in the first equation and the second equation. So now I need to plug 5 and 2 into the second equation. 5 minus 3 times 2 equals negative 1. Those went in there and there. So I get 5 minus 6 equals negative 1. Negative 1 equals negative 1. I'm happy and I'm happy. Because this worked in both equations, this is a solution. Here's an example of an x and a y value that is not a solution. And if I plug this in, the 4 and the 5, I end up with 12 plus 5 equals 17. And I feel pretty happy because this combination worked in the first equation. But to be a solution, it has to work in both equations. So now if I were to plug into the second equation, x is 4, y is 5. Does 4 minus 15 equal negative 1? Heck no. And so by plugging into the second equation, I didn't get something that worked. That tells me that this is not a solution. Very frequently, your x and your y will not work in the first one and not work in the second one. That's not a solution. But simply put, if you want it to be a solution, it has to work in both of those. So this is the unit we're heading into, systems of equations. And as you would guess, it's going to be a little different than solving your regular conventional equations. If you look back at this, you know the steps for solving that. If you look at this thing, you might not know the steps for solving it. So as we go through this unit, we're going to look at least 3 different ways to solve those systems. Graphing method, which is going to depend upon your ability to graph lines. Substitution and elimination. That's where we're headed. It's going to be really enjoyable.